Welcome to the Full Circle Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, David Roberts, along with the OG, Dr. Neil Holmes. It's been a while since we've met with you. By the time you see this broadcast, it will probably be in the new year, 2023. But right now, as we're recording, it is the fifth day of Kwanzaa, Nia, purpose, where we use our collective vocation to develop our community in order to restore our traditional greatness. I had to read that. Eventually, I'm going to memorize all of those, but but I think that's probably very appropriate for today's topic because we have a guest that we've had before. We call him not even a guest, a friend of the show, Dr. Lathardus Goggins. Dr. Goggins, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well, sir. Doing well.
And, we knew when you were on before that we'd have to have you on again because at that time, I believe you were working on your current publication, which is going to be out, sometime in 2023. And we'll talk about all, those details. But you've done 25th year anniversary special edition of the African-Centered Rites of Passage in Education.
Yes.
So what prompted you to do a 25-year anniversary edition?
In large part, man, it's been the work that I've been doing, really got introduced to probably about 5-6 years ago. Almost 7 years ago. Coming to Cleveland Metropolitan School District as a HumanWare partner, I was introduced to the SEL framework, the social emotional framework by Castle. And as they're talking about these different things, self-awareness, social awareness, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and self-management, a lot of the concepts and the things that they were talking about, I'm like, that sounds familiar. I heard that before. And then I was privileged. I was blessed. I was honored to join their national equity work group, and we got a chance to really delve into some of the interworkings of how SEL framework came about and their concerns about how it's being applied and equity and those kind of things. And the more they talked, and we had a chance to, it was a part of a group. It was a national group. We had folks from Oakland, folks from Dallas, and all these other different places. We had a chance to go visit and do all these different things. The more we talked, the more I was like, there was kind of a group of us like, this is not new to y'all, right? And then when Black Panther came out, and everybody was going around, talking about colonizers and those kinds of things. There's one sister from Dallas, just said it plainly. It was like, you out here colonizing concepts that as if, y'all discovered it. And it's not the case. And so I was, because every once in a while I would point out, like you talk about the importance of relationships and those kinds of things. I'm like, that sounds a lot like Jomo Kenyatta facing Mount Kenya when he's talking about the how do we transition from a colonial education system to something that's more rooted in our own experiences. And he talked about the Geku indigenous people. He very specifically says that education takes place in the context of relationship. We learned in relationship to grandma. We learned in relationship to grandpa that education only makes sense in this context of relationship, which is the foundation of what SEL is all about. And so as I heard more and more about that, and I started going back and looking at my stuff that I've written and some of the people that I was pulling forward, then it just makes sense to me. And then, of course, 25 years is just always for people who have, as myself, those tendencies to want everything to be in a nice little box. It was just one of those kind of things where 25 years, it makes sense.
So 25 years, you're actually talking to a new generation. Do you have to change your method of delivery to reach that new generation? Or is it something about the new generation of students that we need to take into consideration?
But the book focuses on really I'm talking to educators, right? So in my initial book, well, this is actually it here. So this is the original book. I'll get it out of the light of however you will say it, but
Yeah.
this was coming out of my master's thesis of was it 1996, and at the time I had been formally introduced to rites of passage. I had a chance to really kind of get into it, and what I noticed was there's a lot of talk in the things and the concepts around rites of passage connected and sounded very similar to the things that around education. And particularly, I would say I come from a family of educators. My grandfather was one of the folks back in the parish that was going around having night classes and doing those kinds of things, superintendent. And so my aunts are all educators and teachers, and particularly I'll call her out, my aunt Anime. She would send me Soul on Ice. She would send me, did you hear about Jomo Kenyatta? She would send me stuff, articles, John Dewey, not the early stuff, but some of his later stuff. And so again, those are the kind of things I was pulling from, right? And so, but I didn't see the direct connection between rites of passage and education. And so when I dug into the literature, I just didn't see anything that made that connection in a formal sense. And so my master's thesis was about doing that, going through the process, doing the research, doing the scholarly work, and see where there's a connection. So that was what this is about. And as I was doing that, it just reinforced the things that I was seeing. Kent State University had they had adopted a rites of passage, which now they call academic stars, but it was a part that at the base of it was this rites of passage process, the same process that I had been introduced to by Dr. Anthony Mensah, and they were already getting these anecdotes from these like these students are not the same, these, and so I dug into that and did that work. And so that was a long way to say that what ended up being, as I'm moving forward and beginning to hear all these buzzwords of SEL and whole child development and all these kinds of things that was coming into education, it just so reminded me of the work that I did and the concepts of the people that I was reading. But they still weren't talking about rites of passage. They still specifically, even now, Zaretta Hammond's book that got a lot of buzz, culturally responsive teaching strategies, right? They would say things that would suggest that it should be culturally relevant and you should bring culture into it. But when it gets to the point of saying specifically, what do you do with a room full of Black kids? They won't go so far as say it should be African-centered, right? And so there was still that disconnect. And if you've heard it, I remember hearing it all along. Back when it was, multiculturalism and we should, be culturally relevant and all the rest of this kind. Okay, cool. And you get almost no one will say we shouldn't be culturally relevant. But what does cultural relevancy look like when you have a room full of African kids? We have a room full of students that are from African descendants. It has to be African-centered. And that is still, for many, a bridge too far. They'll agree with the whole concept that it has to be this, but make that next step. How does that apply to now you have a room full of Black kids? It has to be African-centered. And when you label it that, even still today, it is still too scary for most.
Now you talked about in the book, because I read the whole draft of the book that's coming out, and You talked about social emotional learning, and I know in the school district that I'm in now, they're starting to talk about healing centered engagement. But there was one point, and I had to chuckle when they talked about you talked about it being white supremacy with a hug. I think you were quoting Dr. Dina Simmons.
Yeah.
What does that mean specifically?
Again, we go back to this, right? Because healing centered engagement. That's Dr. Sean Jenwright, and he's phenomenal. And a part of his tenets is the restoration of the identity, right? The whole healing centered engagement is centered on this idea of identity. So go again. What does identity, and particularly the restoration of the identity, looks like for a Black student? Where does trauma, you bring in work of Dr. Howard C. Stevenson, when he right there in Philadelphia, when he's talking about that when we talk about trauma, we should also include the understanding of historical, cultural isolation, oppression as a traumatic event. It may not be acute like some violent thing that just happened, but the effects on the brain and the effects of hyper vigilance and all the kind of things that we talk about as a part of trauma responses are also there when you grow up in a system, in a place in which your identity is oppressed and your culture is under constant attack. And so you get to the same place. So to go back down to Dr. Jenwright's in the Healing Center, so if it is centered on the idea of restoring identity, it has to then, we talk about Black children of African descent, has to get to African-centered, right? So Dina Simmons is talking about, so when we're saying, because she was connecting that to Zaretta Hammond's work, this is why we had to be concerned about equity. We had to be concerned about providing culturally responsive teaching strategies to go along with the SEL, because otherwise, if you are centered in your white supremacy, and though you may be compassionate for these Black kids, if you're not about restoring their authentic identity, you're just making white supremacy nice. You're just making it with a hug, is what she was referencing. And so that's been the struggle, So even with CASEL, with the restorative, with the SEL framework, they recently, this past year, came up with reintroduced the framework, which is what they call a transformative SEL framework. And it is centered again on the identity and restoring, transforming helping a student to identify their identity. And that central question keeps coming up. What does identity mean if you're helping a student center on their identity? If we know that restoring the identity is healing, what does that look like for Black students of African descent? It has to then be African-centered. But we are still struggling with, you see the backlash that has come with supposed critical race theory, silliness and that kind of stuff. Because when you start particularly dealing with Black folks, identifying the African, being explicit with that and the African nature of that, it scares people, because either explicitly or implicitly, if my identity is centered on white supremacy, I cannot be involved in anything that produce Black excellence, right? I'll find a way, either I'll feel uncomfortable and we want to kind of shy away from it if I'm being passive aggressive, or I'll find an outright an attack on my, be outright irritated by the whole presence of it, because where Black excellence exists, white supremacy cannot, right?
Right.
And so anything that produces, that explicitly identifies the African identity in this country is still problematic. But it's the only way that we get to closing the achievement gaps. The only way that we get to doing the things that we say in education that we're committed to.
Now I have a kind of a two-part kind of a question. And bear with me a little bit with this thing. We talk about rites of passage as institutions, and but we can also talk about rites of passage as a process in a sense. And I want to give a historical example of organizations that we might not think so much as rites of passage organizations. Back in the 20s and 30s, we had a group called the Southern Negro Youth Council, based in the South, based out of the HBCUs, and some of the high schools. Produced people like Ella Baker, and they were activists, they were radicals, and when that organization kind of faded, some of their people went on to help to guide the organization that we later knew as SNCC in the 60s, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and later the Student Coordinating Committee. And then out of that, you might have something called the Black Panther. All these are youth organizations: Black Panther Party youth organization, SNCC youth organization, the SNCC of the 20s and 30s, the youth organization. The Pan-African movements of the 70s and 80s, AAPRP, etc. They all kind of youth organizations. How does the struggle for a liberatory politics, how does that fall into the rites of passages movement? That's part one of the question. And part two of the question is, how do we ground these kind of organizations within the community, so when they come into the schools, they're already in the, like kids grow up in them as opposed to being exposed to them when they come into the school system as a secondary institution and kind of go back into something else.
For sure. So let me put a little context there. So I'm with you with the idea that rites of passage should be first thought of as a process and a model, not as a program, right? And so when I talk about rites of passage, I tend to focus on the process, which I believe is a universal human development process, Hero 1,000 Faces, the hero's journey, any number of evidence in which, when we're talking about human development, it will always be a rites of passage process. The only real question becomes, are we conscious of it? And out of that consciousness, do we know to what we're being developed into? Or do we know what stages we're coming next? That's the only real question that is at hand. It is so much a part of being who we are. One of the books I got talks about, when we don't provide it, the children will provide it for themselves. So you get gang cultures, you get all these different kind of things, because as a community, if we're not providing, as a family, we're not providing rites of passage, our children will do it anyway, with all the ignorance of being new human beings, right? And all the potential influence of those who would want to control what the outcomes are, how you think of yourself. Do you think of yourself as a human being, fully rational and with self-efficacy, self-determination, kujichagulia, or do you think of yourself in service to my agenda, right? So it's going to happen anyway. So the real question is those conscious issues. Now, with that said, that the kind of things you were talking about, right? So these youth councils, or be it in churches, you used to have the youth group, right? There were all these opportunities to practice and learn the issues of being an adult. How do you participate? How is it that you get a chance to practice, stand up and do your Sunday speech and be able to articulate in front of a crowd? All those kinds of activities, right? So that's a part of it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be yet another thing, particularly in education, because the education at its root, when you go back and look at education indigenously or at any point of from a cultural foundation perspective, it is rites of passage. It's always been rites of passage. And the challenge to educators that if you're involved in this rites of passage, shouldn't you be aware that you're doing it? Should you not then be able to understand the process of preparation, separation, transition, reincorporation? And because so much of what is considered to be good teaching builds upon these different concepts, but just don't necessarily say this is rites of passage, or do not necessarily tie them all together as a cohesive process. We're talking about deliberative or differentiated learning here, and we'll talk about project-based learning over here, and we'll talk about, but the rites of passage process helps to coordinate all those things into a single thing. Or we talk about the idea of having a portfolio, artifacts that show accomplishment. That's rites of passage when done well, right? You get a symbol, you did this thing, you get this symbol, we know that you can do it. Mm-hmm. And now that we know that you can do it, you get privileges. You get privileges. You get to you show that you can do it, now you get privileges, but you also get burden. Because we know that you can do it, here you're accountable. It may be show your neighbor how to do it. So now we get into cooperative learning, all those kinds of things. But what rites of passage does is tie those things together more comprehensively versus these individual initiatives that plague education. Now, also, as what you're saying, rites of passage takes place because, again, it's not a linear thing. It's not preparation, separation, reincorporation. Preparation, separation, transition, reincorporation, and you're done. It's cyclic, right? That everything that I learned to do in this stage just becomes preparation for the next stage, right? But it also is at every point of the human experience. So there's rites of passage that should take place within the community. As a community, we should be providing rites of passage for our young, but through the whole life cycle. For young, for adolescents, for young adults, or the nation builders, for midlife, into eldership, and ultimately into ancestry, right? And ways in which we then remember even our ancestors and keep them present in the community. So at every level there, but also every part of my life. There are things that I do with my children as a part of their rites of passage that is specific to, here's what it means to be a part of this family. Here's our family history. Here's our things that we have gone through. Here's what right? So they're part of that. But at the end of the day, rites of passage is about how to live a full human life. And that's the part where, going back to Dr. Asa Hilliard, he said, I never encountered a group of children that are not geniuses. We know what to do. First thing you do is treat them like human beings. Second thing you do is love them, right? And he's talking about not some kumbaya, let's all get along kind of, but a very practical aspect of love, which comes with accountability and again, being able to acknowledge the human being. That's the thing that's missing. That's the thing that's the challenge. So when you're talking about then the political aspect of it, that's a part of the what the community should be providing experiences to understand the politics in which we're engaged in. What are the needs? What are the power level? What are the needs of the community? What are the power processes in the community? How to pull these levers of power? How to hold those folks accountable? All that's a part of that the thing that we need our children and every member of our society to know. And so that's something that's a part of it. And I think as we begin to think about it, then the ways in which engagement takes place and education takes place becomes more organic, becomes more authentic, and particularly with this past thing with the COVID, we also know that education isn't something that just takes place within four walls from between 8 and 3. Again, rites of passage and making this connection to the community helps to make education more authentic. And education, again, to quote Dewey, is life. Rites of passage is about the process of developing and going through life. And so they're one and the same. And that's how I tend to think about it. And that's how I think what I advocate for and what I hope the book encourages people to consider.
Now, Dr. Goggins, there was one part of the book in the intro. I don't want to misquote you, but it was something about anyone that's worthy of being a teacher. You should see yourself as like a tool to fill that gap. Help me out.
any good children of our children, any good
Right.
teacher of our children should see education as an act of liberation.
Right.
Right. That's just, if you're not involved in liberating our children, then you're not a good teacher.
Right.
At best, you might be a good instructor. You might be able to explain how to do Pythagorean theorem very well. But if you don't understand why that's important, how helping a student understand the process helps liberate their mind and helps them to question and examine the world around them, the politics, Dr. Neal, then you're not a good teacher. Not for us. Right?
Exactly. That's why I think that piece stuck out to me, because I was thinking about my own experience as a school counselor. And I'll give you an example of something that I do. And then my question to you would be, I guess, how other teachers could incorporate these concepts into every day. So as a counselor, if I have a student that is, cutting a lot of class, counselors, we don't do discipline. We're not the ones that are going to be like, you get a detention or something, or going to suspend you. But since we're now doing all this, social emotional learning, PBIS, that kind of stuff, those students are brought to the counselor first before, they end up seeing their administrator and possibly getting, discipline. So what I always do with a student, instead of chiding them, you've been cutting class and this and that, I always talk to them realistically, like, how do you see yourself and what are your goals? Because then if they say, I want to do this and do this, well, you're going to need a high school diploma for that. And I know some of these classes probably aren't feeding you, for lack of a better word. But if it's the way the system is set up, you're going to have to get through them and graduate, blah, 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 to go on and do what you do. But I don't just go in with the chiding, shaking, wagging my finger at them because, they've been cutting class. I always put it on them. How do you see yourself and what are your goals? That's just my little piece. Are there other things that you could, I guess, tidbits that you could give teachers, how they could incorporate this into their everyday? And also keep in mind, like in my school, it's very diverse. So it's very rare that I get a room full of students that, African descendant students, I might have 10 out of 30 or something. So do you have any, I guess, advice?
Sure. And what you're doing is very important, right? So the idea of introducing them to their future selves.
Right.
Right. And again, as a child, that's still new, right? If I'm 10 years old and you're going to tell me about something that's going to happen in 5 years, that's a half a lifetime to me, right? Now, us old folks, we're like 5 years, that's just around the corner.
Right.
But to a 10-year-old, 5 years is a half of a lifetime. You're talking about 10 years old, I'm in middle school, and you're talking about what's going to happen when I'm graduating from high school. You know, that's almost another lifetime away. So we have to be very deliberate in introducing and providing opportunities for them to consider their future selves, right? And do so with the sense that, you know, because all too often as adults, you know, you don't know what's going on. I can't tell, you know, you young people, this, that, another. You wait until you get my age. Then you know it, right? Okay, I can wait until I get your age, or we can start having this discussion now, right? And so we have to do it with a certain amount of compassion. So that's one. And I think that is fundamental again to everybody. And I go back to Dr. Asa Hilliard. Treat them like human beings. What are some key fundamental absolutes about your understanding about human beings? And operate out of that. All human beings are designed to socialize. All human beings are designed to learn. I may not want to learn what you're teaching me, but I'm going to learn something.
Right.
And so a part of making that connection, identifying, and right, all human beings are designed to protect themselves, right? So if those are one of three things that I carry with me, then I know fronting you in front of your people, making you feel threatened, you're going to naturally come out and protect, right? But if I can socialize with you, make you get a sense of belonging, that also means that sense of protection is you'll protect us. You'll protect your family. You'll protect this group, right? And so how can we use that? How can we, all those kinds of things. So but what is your fundamental understanding of what human beings are? And then how does that then guide your interactions with your students? Your fundamental, I think there has to ask the question, are you a teacher or are you an instructor? Right? Mm-hmm. You have to get to that. Because the whole thing of, I give an example of in Louisiana, it was incumbent upon, sorry about this thing going on. Right. It was incumbent upon them to provide an education to their slaves. As a good Christian Catholic slave owner, it was incumbent upon you, edict from the Pope, to provide your slaves an education. Now, what kind of education would a slave master provide to his slaves?
One that makes them a better slave.
How to make them a better slave.
Right.
And that also means then, for a position of a counselor or somebody who supports education, if you just come in and help teachers become better instructors without fundamentally addressing what it is that they're doing and why they're standing in front of the students, you could just be a part of a process of helping them to make better slaves. Mm-hmm. Right? Right. So that first fundamental question has to be, a part of it is, why are you standing here? And if you can't answer it, that's one issue. And if it's not to liberation, if it's not to this idea of developing the whole human being, then that's a problem, right? And then once you get through those, the rites of passage process is about ultimately recognizing that, one, if I expect something of you, I have to prepare you, right? Which is basically, again, gets back to this good teaching. That I cannot, for example, one of the things that in the first book I interviewed a bunch of, I won't say a bunch of, but a few folks from the Jewish faith, that on a day that a child is born, this part of the Torah is read. 13 years from now, during their transition ceremony, the expectation is the child will read from the Torah in Hebrew. Now, if that's the expectation 13 years from now, what has to take place now? They have to be prepared to be able to read Hebrew. So there's school outside of public schools between birth and 13 that young Jewish children will attend, so that on the day they're expected to read it, they've been prepared to do so, right?
Absolutely.
So as a teacher, if I expect my student to be able to do these things, then I have to, one, make sure that they are exposed, have opportunity to practice, and are prepared to do so. It's just fun. It's unfair to test you on something that you've not been exposed to. Not just exposed, but prepared for, right?
Right.
So that's part of it. But also, where does the test come? Tests should come every day, in some way, shape, or form. I was as a teacher, I used to ask my students, yes, no, kind of, sort of, or maybe. Right? Just a quick assessment. Anything what I just said, yes, no, kind of, sort of, or maybe. Are you getting it, not getting it? You got it? If you tell me yes, then I expect for you to be able to use it and go. If you tell me no, then I can circle back. Kind of, sort of, maybe. Well, let's talk about what part is you get this part, you don't get this part, right? So just, as they say, informal assessments. But it's the testing. But also then when I created tests and do things, the tests that they passed or tests that they had could be used as notes for upcoming stuff. Mm-hmm. So they would build a notebook along with the notes that they took that they could use, and the stuff that they saw in September would be stuff that they could use on a test in November. So it builds in, one, the usefulness, two, the idea that if I get this, I can use this stuff is useful, right? I'm gonna show you how it's useful in class, but you build this, right? Secondly, then it was this idea of understanding why is this stuff important? I would tell my students, it's not so important that it's not important that you know that X equals 1, but it is important for you to be able to understand, look at a situation, and question, what's the unknown? Okay, if this is the variable, what are some things that go along with that? What's some things that make sense? Because here's what you can be able to do with this kind of thinking. When some dude walks up to you, say, hey, baby girl, I got this thing. So you can stop and be like, hold on, okay. What's the variable here? What's the unknown? And when you start asking questions, dude or whoever's trying to run flim flam, so let me leave you alone. Right. Let me go find somebody else who's not going to ask me all these questions, because clearly by the way you're asking questions, you're thinking, right? That's why this is important, right? So, and it goes back to, there was a report done 2019 from a nation at risk to a nation at hope. And it was a teacher was saying, I don't teach math, I teach kids, humans, math. I think that's again, goes back to the rites of passage process centers the human being as a part of the process, as not a part of the process, as the center, the purpose of the process. The purpose isn't math. Math is a tool to human development. The process is about human development, right? And we get to how this is connected to all these other things. You're talking about healing, centered engagement. Because once we centered the human being, then we can, all these other things, protective pieces come a part of it. And the academics follow. And it's clear, the research is clear on that. The best way to improve math scores, reading scores, is improve school culture. Mm-hmm. School culture always comes first, but in everything that I've seen, thinking about the research that was done in Cleveland, school culture always came first, and then increase in reading and writing, reading and math scores.
Absolutely.
Increase in decrease in rates of absenteeism. All these kinds of things that we know support academic achievement. It was never the other way around. It was not that reading improved, math improved, and then school culture improved. School culture always came first. School culture is always going to be about how do you recognize, honor, acknowledge the human being. Where human beings feel safe, acknowledged, then that's a place where I can learn, right? Mm-hmm. In rites of passage, in the process, we talk about the matrix of safety, potential, and energy. Where I feel safe, where I recognize potential, future self, and there's energy, there's resources there, then you can get this process, preparation, separation, transition, reincorporation, to move. If I don't feel safe, there's no potential, why am I doing this? There's not the resources, energy brought to it, then you can't expect the process, you can't expect the learning to take place, right? So that's why I think this is where the importance of understanding rights in the context of education becomes important, because it helps organize all these various desperate type of things that oftentimes we get involved in education. And one of the things that frustrate teachers most is this idea, yet here's another thing you want me to do. Right? But if it was in the context of rights, it would not be seen so much as yet another thing. It will be all these desperate things. But go back to what we talked about earlier. The challenge becomes, to what extent are teachers prepared to address the humanity, the full humanity of the students that they're engaged in, that they're present? That's the real challenge. That's the real challenge.
Now, Dr. Goggins, I'm sorry, Dr. Holmes, did you have another question?
You got a quick question. In the introduction, one of the people in the introduction, I think Boykins or someone, said that that rights in the African community here should be based on communal, the communal values or the communal process that you find in Africa itself. What occurs in that communal process, and what are the values in that communal process, and how do you defend those values and processes in the context of the kind of culture that Africans here live within?
Right. So A. Boykin, right, he talks about the West African ethos. I want to say it's 9 characteristics. So you put me on the spot here. I want to see if I can get through them. Communalism, harmony, verb, energy, um, expressive individualism, oral tradition, social time perspective. I gotta pull it out here. I'm missing a couple of, I think energy and verb might be a couple, that. But these ideas of what I found particularly interesting, communalism, right? So we must operate as a community, but we have to have harmony within that, right? It's one thing to say we'll come together as a group and do something as a community, but it has to be done in a way that is harmonious, right? But also juxtapose that against this idea of expressive individualism. That as an individual, you have to find your own unique voice. And the way that I process it is think about jazz. Jazz is these ethos in such a beautiful way. If I say, okay, we're gonna play, if I play the A Train and Count Basie is featuring Count Basie's orchestra, or Duke Ellington's orchestra, or if it's Thelonious Monk, or if it's John Coltrane blowing the sax on it, you would have what? How many different people? 4 or 5 different versions of it, right? And as soon as you hear it, because the way Basie's playing it, it's going to have a different sound than the way that Duke plays it, right? Thelonious is, he's going to do his own thing, and it's going to be all kind of, John Coltrane blows it. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be harmonious. It's going to be a bunch of different things. He may reference some other things in there. There'll be, but each one, as soon as you hear it, you'll be like, oh, that's who that is, right? They'll have their own signature. But at the same time, they can't play it so uniquely that you don't know it's the A Train, right? That kind of thing where we're talking with our young people, particularly, but in organizations, that's been the struggle, right? That we can all work towards liberation and freedom in our unique ways, but do so in a way that maintains the harmony so that we all know that we're working towards freedom. We all know that we're working towards economic sustainability. We all know that we're working for developing our community, right? And have the space to know that when you do it, Brother Roberts, when you get a hold of it, you're going to do it your kind of way, right? And the way that you do it doesn't necessarily challenge or invalidates the way that I do it. I don't have to see it as a contradiction. It can just be different and beautiful at the same time. But in any way that it is done towards, right? So that's a part of, so when Boykins is talking about that West African ethos and values, those are the kinds of things that he's talking about. And I think, again, we get into what's the process so that I can learn my voice? That's a part of the rites of passage concept, right? That each of us are born with a particular intent by the Creator, right? And so, and this is why I take issue with some of the people who come in, and over the years jump on this bandwagon and want to do a rites of passage program. And there's a lot of good folks out there doing this. There's a lot of good folks out there. Let me say that. A lot of good folks out there doing it. But also folks that realize I can pimp the system and come in and we're going to do this thing on this weekend. We're going to get you a dashiki. We're going to beat some drums. We'll give you a day name. Boom, 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 rites of passage. No, no. That again, one of the basic assumptions, we're all born with the intent, right? The Creator's intent on our lives. So if my intent is unique, my preparation has to be unique as well, right?
Mm.
But my intent will never be to bring disharmony to the community. My intent will always be, how do I uniquely be myself in the context of community? Go back to Ubuntu, the concept of Ubuntu. I am because we are because I am. Both the individual and the collective are honored, and one cannot exist without the other. But one does not destroy the other, right? It's just, and it is often so contrary to the Eurocentric way of thinking, where if I see difference, I have to rank one as superior over the other. So you hear people, their remedy is to be blind, be colorblind, because if I see color, I'm going to have to assign superiority or inferiority to it. Those kinds of things. I feel funny talking to this about saying this kind of stuff in front of Dr. Neal, because this is where I got this stuff from. In the first introduction to all this stuff from back in the day. But it's like, now this is it is really an uphill battle, because again, I think this is where the disconnect, I keep on going back to it, where people will say, yes, of course, culturally relevant and all this kind of stuff. But as soon as you identify specifically what this means for Black students, now, because they're stuck in a Eurocentric concept,
Mm-hmm.
it throws them off.
Mm.
They just can't deal with it. And because so many of us as Americans writ large, and say specifically Black folks as well, even when we have an oppositional culture concept, if that's white, I'm Black, even in that construct, I'm still centered on what is white.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so anything that then would challenge white supremacy challenges me. And if that's unexamined, undealt with, it's going to be hard. It's going to be damn near impossible for me to engage in anything that's going to produce Black excellence.
I can share with you a challenge that I had in the school. Whereas we were at a certain time in the year where we weren't making any schedule changes, right? Mm-hmm. So I had a student come to me and he wanted to get out of some class and get into another. I can't remember the specifics, but he had kind of an underlying circumstance. So I allowed the schedule change for him specifically. Mm-hmm. He shared it with his friends, like, the counselors are allowing, not just his friends, I think he sent a little blast out on social media. The counselors are allowing you to change from this class to that class, right? Mm-hmm. And so I had students coming to me wanting to make that same change. I said, hey, it's too late. And I'm just going to call him Jimmy. What Jimmy said, such and such, I was like, well, Jimmy had a special circumstance. I can't do it for everybody. And I was ready to be upset with Jimmy, like, why are you going around telling everybody this? But then I thought about it. He was practicing a West African ethos. He was looking out for his entire community. Mm-hmm. He wasn't just saying, okay, I got what I wanted and now I'm all good. He shared it. So basically, although it made it more difficult for me, what he did is what he should have done in a way. Mm-hmm. So I did meet with him, and I, instead of, getting upset with him, I said, I understand you were looking out for your community, but I can't do this for everybody, right. And the other counselors are going to make this change. But that was just an example that me working within this education system with under a European construct, and in many ways, we have to fight off our Stockholm syndrome as well. I was ready to bite his head off, but then I had to think, rethink, So that was just the first thing that jumped out of my mind when you got to talking, about what we're dealing with.
right? And imagine how that, like you said, how that could have gone versus being aware and being like, okay, I understand what you're doing, and here's what let me expose a little bit more, be a little bit vulnerable, expose you. Here's the backstory to some of this, right? Here's how, and maybe next time this is how this can work. Now, Neil, this goes back to what you're saying. That's practicing politics, right? Get this understanding. And that thing, and it doesn't, getting involved with rights and understanding the rites of passage process often doesn't require us to do anything different or do anything different. It just requires, in many ways, to do the things that we do differently, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
It's a way that we think about it. If we think about it in a certain context, we can do the exact same thing, but it takes on a different meaning. And it can be used as a lever to bring about that liberation. It can be used as a lever to help understand the process and what is the ultimate goal is human development, right? Versus this is the rule, this is what you did, and no understanding of why, no understanding of what's going on, no discussion, no, all that kind of stuff, right? Or taking it personal. Well, made my life more difficult, and so you just out here just boy, I ain't never gonna do nothing for you. That kind of stuff. And it's just like no. If you rethink how you doing this stuff, it will change. And obviously, hopefully, if you're thinking about things differently, there are going to be some things that will change as well. There, even if it's just the understanding of the curriculum and how you approach the curriculum and all that kind of stuff becomes ultimately a part of it.
Now, Dr. Goggins, just based on what you've been able to share in the limited time that we've had, I'm sure there are going to be new teachers and probably veteran teachers as well who will be interested in picking up the 25th year anniversary edition of African Rites of Passage in Education. So in the little bit of time we have left, could you tell us when the book will be out? Where can people get it?
The book will be out, I said, soon. Beginning part of January at this point. I'm just waiting on a couple of different pieces to come out. I've gotten some good endorsements and got some good reviews, and for which I'm thankful and working on that. It'll be to the printers within probably the first week or two of January. It will be available at your local bookstore. They can order it. Definitely go on to Amazon. You also can go to my website, afrocentric.info, afrocentric.info, and there'll be links to St. Rest Publications. Will be there. There are also, for more work on, kind of things that I'm doing, successfulacademics.com, successfulacademics.com. There's a bunch of resources there regarding Black child and SEL, anti-racism, and also links to my company's both St. Rest Publications, but also applied academic solutions. So any of those places will be there. But ask your local bookstore, and they can get it and tell you, hey, I heard this brother, and I think you ought to bring him in for a discussion. That also be cool too.
All right, I definitely do that at the Sankofa bookstore here in DC. So you might have to travel a little bit.
Hey, no worries. No worries.
Dr. Goggins, once again, we want to thank you for joining us. We look forward to the book coming out and the masses being fed by it. And we look forward to having you back again once the book is out and it's in circulation.
I appreciate it. Appreciate y'all and appreciate the work that you're doing. It's always cool to see y'all. It's always cool to connect with y'all and follow y'all. And it was always cool to see the OG.